evening. It's another Thursday night episode of Real Monsters. I'm your host, S.K. Barrett, and joining me once again, Wes Hobrick.
How's it going, one and all? We have a bit of a special show tonight.
Yeah, we're kicking off a new recurring feature, death cults,
Yeah,
and we're choosing a doozy to start off with.
yep, the granddaddy of them in modern times, and that's Jonestown.
Yeah, absolutely. This is Uh, man, this is a biggie in so
Yeah,
many ways. In so many ways. Um,
I
like,
still think the number attached to that has been the greatest in modern time for this sort of thing.
yeah, and you have to
But
go back a long ways to find anything close to it.
yeah, I would imagine, definitely.
All right, but we're gonna kick things off with this week in crime history.
This week in crime history, I actually don't have anything for the history side of that, but I do have a couple news items
Okay.
from this week in crime. Let's see, this one just came across my feed before we were going live tonight. Um, Mother killed toddler because he was getting in the way of an affair, prosecutors say, in Gloucester, New Jersey. Prosecutors say a New Jersey mother killed her toddler son because she felt he was getting in the way of her extramarital affair.
I
Y-
wish this was the first time we'd heard of this kind of
yeah.
behavior.
Still, every time you hear about something like that, it just makes you think, man, the human race is going a bit lower than yesterday, you know?
It
At
does.
least it does me.
It can feel like it, but we know. I mean, objectively, we know that's not really the case. We're just more aware of the bullshit that's going on in other places in the world more than ever before. So, 30 years ago, we would be blissfully ignorant of a lot of the shit that happens in the world. And
Very true.
but now we're not. We're not protected by distance and technology anymore. So we become um, inundated with all the shit that happens and that people do to each other.
Very true. Yeah, most definitely with something like that. It's the new media, especially my media with everything that I follow. But
Yeah.
this one was a little bit more interesting. Mom charged with murder says demons told her to sacrifice her young son. June 25th of this past week, a
Mm.
Texas mother charged with capital murder told a relative that past Sunday the demons had told her to kill her 8-year-old son, police said. Irving, Texas resident Tisha Sanchez, age 30, was arrested after police found her son unresponsive in bed. The relative told police that Sanchez said demons had told her to, quote, sacrifice her son, and that she, quote, needed to forgive her. Not
Wow.
sure what that, yeah.
The sister
Wow.
needed the sister to forgive her.
Yeah, it took me a second of looking at that. I was like, oh, yeah, she's talking to a relative.
Too many pronouns.
Yeah, that's right. Kind of lazily written. But the officers found the child dead when they arrived at the home, according to Dallas County Medical Examiner. Sanchez was booked into an Irving jail on Sunday and transferred to Dallas County Jail on Monday. Faces a charge of capital murder as well as assault of a peace officer and resisting arrest stemming from a separate incident. No bail was set. It'd
Yeah,
be interesting to see what comes of that.
that really sounds like some serious mental illness going on there.
Yeah. Whether it's that, you can't really tell from this article, though, whether it's that or whether she's just bullshitting. But, I mean, the
Yeah,
article is the Post, so I trust him. But
that is
let's
that. Yeah,
see.
but they don't know what her real intent is.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Yeah, they
But
had no
but that,
idea.
when you get into the devil made me do it stuff, and you're not just scapegoating, if you actually are hallucinating demons, that's a problem.
Yeah, wasn't that a famous quote from some murder case? It said that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember now. They said that might be true that, or they're not lying if they said the devil made them do it because they're crazy. Something to that effect. I can't
Huh.
remember what case that was, but um, yeah, the last item I had was New Jersey mom allegedly beaten unconscious by a teen who told her son to, quote, go back to Mexico. She's got some nasty ass
What?
bruises, too. Damn. Wish I could put that up, but I will share the link. This one, she was defending him from bullies, and allegedly they
And then they
beat her
took it.
pretty good.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but that is all I have for now because I
Okay.
have quite a bit on Jonestown, and
Yeah, that's
there really
okay.
wasn't a whole lot for the history calendar this week. So,
That is quite all right. This is a big story to cover, and
it really is.
I'm
I have
I'm
10
I'm
pages of notes. So,
woo.
actually, I have 11 or 12.
Do you write
Yep.
like do you write like Unabomber, like edge to edge, and top, there's like no margins and the tiny tiny writing, and like
Oh,
are you doing a manifesto? Are you?
I should. Sometimes my handwriting is that way, but I have to take one of my propanolol pills before it can be that way because I have that hand tremor
Oh,
without it. I have essential tremor if I don't take that to control it. So, but yeah, in looking at this series that we decided to do on death cults, with Jonestown being the first one, um, it's something new, definitely,
yeah.
for what we have been doing through here. We'll be taking a look at the psychological dynamics of what goes on because there's a lot to look at, and it's definitely a buildup. It's not just something that happens, once or in a vacuum. So, but
Yeah, yeah. This is we chose Jonestown because it's such a it's pretty well known, at least on the surface, and it's a really good introduction to the topic. I mean, it's hard to find a better one. Let's just put it that way.
oh, absolutely, yeah, it definitely is. And getting into that before we dive deeper into Jonestown itself and Jim Jones, I thought it might be instructive to get a definition of what makes a cult.
Yeah, let's do
And
that.
to do that, I went digging actually just before we got on to find a definition or an article or something by a guy whose work I had followed a bit in the past, and that's Rick Ross. He does a lot of cult education and a lot of deprogramming, like
Oh, okay.
yeah, like family members will
Right,
recruit him to try to help with that because
right.
it's something he's
That's a big.
studied for a while.
That is a rough job.
Oh man, I can't even imagine. But um, this is taking it from a piece he wrote in The Guardian. The word cult can be broadly defined as, quote, formal religious veneration, a system of religious beliefs and its body of adherents, a religion regarded as unorthodox or spurious, and a great devotion to a person or idea, as well as persons united by devotion or allegiance to an artistic or intellectual movement or figure. I'll go ahead and put that in the chat so people can see the full article.
I think we're most familiar with a charismatic leader. Um, that's aspect of a cult, right?
Yeah. I think when it's used most nowadays, it's definitely ties to that.
I was surprised to hear um, uh, the word artistic in there. Um,
Hmm.
I can't think off the top of my head of a cult, not that I know all the cults, um, where art was at the center of it.
With that definition, it almost made me think of something more like a cult film. Like to say something has a cult
Oh,
following. Yeah.
cult. Yeah, that's a pretty. Yeah, okay. I mean, we do use that term.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, there
Oh
was
yeah,
another
yeah.
part to
Here
that.
he actually mentions Trekkies. So there you go.
Yep, Trekkies would be one, and what Kelly just said in the chat. I was taught in uni not to call them cults. The new phrase used was alternate religion. Um, yeah, there has been a move by certain parties to sort of inject political correctness into the study of this. That's where you get
Yeah.
that sort of alternate religion. But
What
there was
by
a
cult former cult members,
yeah, yeah,
current
yeah. In
cult member.
fact, Ross says in his article here, these apologists often prefer the supposedly politically correct title "new religious movement."
Yeah. You know what
But
what's interesting is we had back in the 80s we had a Maharaja in Oregon where they were all the people were coming there and they took over an entire county. Um,
yeah, actually Netflix made a series on that.
yeah, really good one, really good one.
Wild Wild Country. Yeah, it was good. I
Uh,
liked it.
and guess what? Nobody died.
Yep. Although they did try to poison some in the town, didn't they?
No, I don't think so.
I thought they did. I thought that poison was part of that story
I
at
don't.
some point.
I don't recall there being any even attempted murders. Um,
Hmm.
it all unraveled, and everybody kind of went their own way, and nobody seemed to get hurt all that badly,
Yeah.
except for losing their money.
Yeah, that's where I didn't think they were successful, but I thought they had tried. Maybe not, but um yeah,
All
definitely
right,
not the case with the one we're going to look at tonight with Jim Jones and Jonestown.
all right. Who the fuck was Jim Jones?
Jim Jones, born in 1931 in Lynn, Indiana, and he had a rather distant family with his mom and dad. They weren't there, they weren't really in the picture for him. And I think this is sort of what laid the groundwork to where he is very, very driven by social approval throughout his life. And
Yeah, yeah. You know what's interesting is I sent you that quote from his son, but there was actually a sentence before that where his son said, "My father was defined by the people who, what was the word?
mhm.
Anyway, he was defined by, the people who looked up to him. In other words,
Oh,
as you say, he was driven by approval."
most definitely. And the sources that I looked at for that, they mention a interesting thing about it when he was still in his teens. While most of the kids around him were, going around and playing soldier and
Yeah.
trying to emulate the Allies for World War II, Jim Jones was trying to emulate Hitler. Not in the moral
What?
sense, but he was playing Hitler because what was so attractive to him about the dictator was how he could stir and command these huge numbers of people.
Oh,
So. That was one weird thing that really sort of laid the groundwork there. I would argue for his politics when we get to that too. But um, the other interesting thing, he would literally hold funerals with the other kids for roadkill
Why?
when he was a kid. It never really said why, but he would, have these huge, elaborate religious rites that he would give for, a dead possum on the side of the road.
Wow.
I don't know if that was one way that he saw as getting more approval in that social approval vein or what.
Yeah, it could be.
But um let's see, he joined 5 different churches when he was still a kid and was active in each of them. And he
At the same
started his
time?
yeah, same time. He was
Crimey.
driven with that. But he later started his own church in Indianapolis when he was only 25, so 1956. And he gained a pretty huge following with that because it was integrated from the beginning.
Oh. Wasn't he Pentecostal? It
Um,
wasn't.
I had always thought of him as being more non denominational, but
Okay.
sort of, taking from all of them, if you will.
Okay.
But let's see. Yeah, it was a huge, very popular thing for him because he was integrated and because he did a lot to help people flout the Jim Crow laws on the books.
Ah.
Um, I don't think people
Uh, Remind.
really think of Indiana when they think of that sort of racism,
Right.
but it was very much there in that state.
Okay.
I- In fact, back in the early 1900s, the Klan was more active in Indiana than in any other Midwestern state.
Holy cow.
Yeah. So, maybe there was more of that there than people realize. But he ended up moving the 140 in his congregation to California. And the big way that he got them to move when he started seeing that there wasn't really anything left for him in Indiana was through the use of nuclear doomsday prophecy,
Ah.
saying, hey, if we go here, the Russians are going to bomb Indiana, but for some reason they're not going to bomb California. So let's move.
What? That
That
they're gonna bomb Indiana, but not California.
yeah.
Who
I mean, he
believes
was
that shit?
he was successful in getting the 140 to move out there with him when
Jesus.
they did that.
I mean, come
So,
on.
but
What?
yeah.
No,
Yep.
no, no. They're not going to go after California with all the
No.
manufacturing and military bases. They're going after Indiana because they want them cows dead.
It's going to be scorched earth with our cornfields. That's what's going to happen. Exactly.
Holy
But
shit.
it was when he was out there that socialism sort of started making its way into Jim Jones's preaching.
Mm,
And, this is to where he would be very political over the people listening to him, saying that you need to get involved with this, you need to be a good little socialist. And this is something that is going to arguably influence his followers more than any prophecies of, Jesus
right.
or anything else. I think it was socialism that was much more of the
It
driving force there.
right, and that took um it really did. I mean, he would still invoke God um in his sermons, but it really was the 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 communism the preaching of communism that um, was his driving force, right? And it did pull
Hmm.
in a lot of people. He was was he in Berkeley or San Francisco?
He was in Northern California for much of that, if I'm not mistaken. I was looking for the city that I wrote down.
But
If I find that, we
yeah,
can
yeah,
get to it.
yeah, you can drop that in there. But it was definitely, you know, in the air, so to speak, at that time in that place. It was a big deal. There was a lot of communist talk
There really
in
was.
Northern California in those days, and so it wasn't um, it didn't make him stand out. It made him fit in.
Yeah, it definitely did. And it also would help down the line to exercise and consolidate more control over the people in Jonestown. Because, when you're talking about it with the California socialism, you're talking 15 followers to a room was essentially the extent of it.
Hmm.
And most of the people thought, we are doing something righteous, so I'm fine with sacrificing a bit. Um,
Right,
yeah, and then, once he starts ramping that up gradually, getting into no sex among the people and things like that, it sort of became easier because that groundwork was laid, I think.
right,
Um,
right. Yeah, and this is an important aspect of a cult leader is, it's the boiling a frog concept. Um,
hmm
you don't come out with your craziest bullshit right up front. You start off really mainstream with a slight variation, and then you just gradually diverge from that little bit at a time, and that way you don't scare people off.
Exactly. Yeah, you definitely have to build it up. And like you said, with the frog in the boiling water, it's a great way to compare it there.
Right.
How are we doing in terms of volume for people in the chat? Can you hear us okay?
I hear you fine.
Yeah, I hear you fine too, but there's somebody I was just talking to saying they couldn't really hear.
Well, I
I
can
wanted to hear what people in the chat were saying. And yeah, Kelly and Chris in the
okay.
chat, you guys are exactly right. It was Flavor Aid
We're
that
getting
was in the
ahead of the
drinks.
story just a little bit. So
Yeah, yeah. We'll get to that, but exactly. It, um, but yeah, and people started giving up their houses around this time and, getting
yeah,
all money that they could to
yeah.
Jones.
Some people were signing over entire paychecks and houses and inheritances and shit like that.
Oh, yeah. Just anything that they could to keep the cult going. Of course, they didn't think about it as a cult,
No, no,
but
no. Well, I mean, it was all set up like a church. They weren't meeting in a, you know, abandoned, Western village like Manson.
yeah,
They had a
yeah.
proper church and all of that stuff. And
Yeah, even though many of them were sleeping 15 to a room with the church,
sleeping at the
but
church.
oh, it was the housing that they had in California.
Ah,
I mean, it was 15 to a room, and it was around shortly after that where Jones said you need to sacrifice the sexual intercourse as well. So none of that for
what?
anybody. Yeah, that
Well,
was before they got to Guyana.
that's uh, that's really also fairly counter to a lot of cults. A lot of cults embrace sexuality rather than disdain it.
Uh, with that, it's really, I think, more of a mixed bag.
Is it?
And they seem to be fine with sex as long as it is either involving the cult leader or somehow being used to control people, or
Oh, yeah,
both.
yeah, that's true. A lot of times the the leader is the one who gets all the sex and everybody else has, is forbidden.
Yeah.
That is often the case in cults.
And for instance, Manson, as an
Right,
example,
right.
is probably the best example of using sex to manipulate.
Uh,
Definitely.
Koresh too, right?
Oh, yeah, he did too. Almost forgot about him for a second. But yeah, they started that before they got to Guyana. And that is where Jones's wife, Marceline, comes into the picture. And also his concubine or mistress, Carolyn Late. They're going to be coming into that story a little bit more later on, but it was around this time that he also started having everybody call him Papa or Father and then call her, Mother.
Oh yeah, he was called, yeah, they called him father.
Hmm. So,
There's the tactics of uh, brainwashing, for lack of a better term. It's not really brainwashing, right? But um, it's an indoctrination process of breaking down individual will. For
hmm
cults, that process is well documented and well known. And Jones followed the script.
yeah, and he did in quite a lot of ways. It was around this time, around 65 or so, when they started going all over the country with buses to recruit more people, too.
Oh,
Um, and one thing I found interesting, because I had never known this until I started doing the research, they sold blessed pictures of Jones to
what?
fund a lot of it. $5 a pop.
Like Virgin Mary pictures?
Yep.
Wow.
And if you didn't have the money to pay for that, but you still wanted your own Jones token, he would give out blessed pennies. So, yeah, leave it up to the socialists to fund his cross country gallivanting with selling lame shit. Uh,
Wow.
yep, and then,
At least Gus Grissom actually took his pennies up into space.
yep, definitely.
Jones probably just got him at the bank and just handed him out.
Yeah, they're just lame ass pieces of copper and zinc touched by some crazy guy.
Probably not even that.
Yep. But yeah, with all those people, he would give them their pennies and say, hey, come to the faith healings after, you know?
Right. Oh yeah, he did faith healing. Jesus. I
Yep.
mean, you know, everything. He did all the tricks.
Oh, yeah. I think the best story about that I heard was the one woman with a broken leg who was healed. And what happened there was Jones and his followers actually drugged her. And then they put a cast on without her even knowing,
What?
and then just removed it later.
Yeah, there's actually some footage of that, I believe.
Oh yeah, yeah. I didn't see the footage of it, but which
Yeah,
we do have
yeah,
some that we're gonna
yeah.
play, don't we?
Audio. We have some audio we're gonna play for sure.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we'll get to that here as we get moving through all this. So, yeah, you had that instance with the broken leg. It was around this time that Jones began abusing amphetamines too, because the work of the church would keep him up to about 2 or 3 o'clock every night,
Mm,
and he felt like he needed it.
right.
So, um, and then he would start using benzos to come down. from that and to get to sleep, presumably.
Yeah, presumably.
Um,
So he was he was depriving himself of sleep, which that doesn't help matters.
oh, not at all. Yeah, it definitely fed his paranoia as things went on. Um, oh, and I had a quote from him with the faith healings. And I'm not sure how people bought this, but he would tell them that the reason that he was wearing the black glasses was that, quote, my eyes will burn you.
Not that he's high. No,
Yeah,
couldn't be
if I
that.
take them off. No. Yeah, my eyes will burn you.
Oh man.
And
What?
of course, with amphetamines, his having many mistresses just multiplied too. And he actually said, I am a martyr because I am the only one who has to have sex here. I'm taking that sexual desire
Oh,
off of you,
oh my God.
and I am a martyr.
Poor me. I have to do all
Poor
this. I
Jones.
have to do all the sex.
Poor me. What were you saying there? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Don't know.
We'll get back to it if it was important.
I'm wondering
But
that, this might be a good time to bring up the quote from his son.
sure. I had another one here that was actually kind of funny, though.
This is from his oldest son, Stephen.
Steven.
Yeah, and it's pretty astonishing. Being the son, it cannot be easy. It cannot be easy being the son of a mass murderer. Um, and that everybody knows his dad's name. Um,
Yeah.
and yet, and there's a couple ways to go with that. As a child of someone like this, is that you can either, be very defensive of him, or you can be very, go the other way. Um, I think from the bits that I saw of Stephen in the documentary, he's pretty clear-eyed about what his dad was and what he wasn't.
He really was, and I
He
think
doesn't seem
that
he doesn't seem angry, He's just like this is who the guy was.
that would apply to Jones's other son, Jim Jones Jr. too. I guess he wasn't in the one that you watched, but he was in the one that I watched a
Okay.
bit.
Yeah.
Um, and that's another thing that we should probably talk a bit about with his early history. He was, a committed leftist in California, like we were talking about, and he had what he called a rainbow family. So he had a white son who was Stephen. He had a black son who was Jim Jones Jr. And
Okay.
then he had, I think, a girl who was Asian and a couple others in there. So I think he had a total of 5, if I'm not mistaken. But Stephen actually also said in that dictionary that he felt um, that the rainbow family idea was another one of his father's frauds, if you will. That it
Oh,
was just there for show.
they weren't really his kids.
Oh no, they were really his kids, but he didn't really give a shit about the
Oh,
the idea behind the rainbow family.
gotcha.
But he called it that. So, but yeah, definitely. Another quote from him on the sex thing. He actually told one of his followers this. It was Vernon Gosney, who really factors into the later story of Jonestown too. But he said, "My main goal was to get you to socialism on the tip of my dick." In terms of all the women he was sleeping with. So,
Wow.
Yeah, but he also had a lot of paranoia when he was in California that, hey, the government's out to get the People's Temple.
Right.
Um,
He,
it's just horrible, and we need to move. And that's where it got me to thinking. I wonder if that wasn't the result of him getting full bore on those amphetamines around that same time.
could be the paranoia.
Yeah.
Well, it certainly couldn't have helped. I mean, clearly, whether he actually believed the nuclear holocaust bullshit about that got him to move to California, whether that was just a ploy of his,
Hmm.
um, he certainly ramped up on the paranoia in California.
He really did. And it actually didn't quite stop there. He had a newspaper in the church, which was essentially his propaganda arm. And he started telling the members of the People's Temple there that if we don't flee to Guyana because it's a socialist country, blacks will be put into concentration camps in the United States and they will be tattooing numbers on everybody's body.
Ah, still waiting for that. I don't have
Yeah.
it. I don't have mine.
But yeah,
Maybe
that.
maybe it's just under black light. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. Yep. And oh, yeah, Kelly, we will be getting to the Suns towards the end of this.
Yeah.
But yeah, they, went to Guyana in South America.
And they drove
For,
buses down there initially, right? A
they
bus
did.
caravan. That's a hell of a long drive.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's several thousand miles to get down there.
Yeah.
But
And not on good roads.
yep. Yep, they got down there and they started building it.
Any idea
Um,
why they chose that country? Is there anything about that? Why did they
because
choose
it's
Guyana?
socialist. The
Oh,
others weren't at the time, but Jones liked that it was socialist.
okay.
I think he was trying to get a land deal with people in that government too. Because the area that they chose was literally you couldn't imagine a place more out in the BFE. Bumfucked Egypt for people who don't know. Out in the sticks,
Yeah.
literally. And the
Yes.
vital thing about that was it kept people from escaping who wanted to leave too.
Because it's fucking jungle. Now, so here's how. So the capital of Guyana is Georgetown. So they have an international airport, as you'd expect.
Yeah.
But Jonestown was 150 miles from the capital. Now
Yep.
there was an airstrip that you could fly into on a small prop plane. Um,
Hmm.
and that was still 5 miles away from Jonestown. And not 5 miles like, oh, I got to go to the mall. This is 5 miles on rough hewn roads through literal jungle.
Well, actually, there wasn't a way to drive to Jonestown much at all.
Well, not initially.
Yeah, well, the only way that you had to get in there was the airstrip, or you could take a riverboat.
Well, at some point, roads were cut to the airstrip from Jonestown.
Yeah, a couple of them, but
Yeah.
there's no way
Even
to drive from Georgetown to
no,
Jonestown.
not from Georgetown. No,
Hmm.
it's but from the airstrip to Jonestown, you could drive. Uh, but it was not even that was not. Yeah, it's confusing Georgetown and Jonestown. Um, yeah, it's easy to hear those the same. Jonestown was 5 miles from this tiny little airstrip,
Hmm.
and there was a kind of a road that a heavy truck could get through.
A heavy truck or tractors.
Yeah.
Yeah, the tractor's pulling it in. The condition of that road that you were mentioning there from the airstrip actually gets pretty vital. the more we get into this sort of crescendoing with
Yeah.
what happens. Um, I'm sorry, just looking to see where I was there.
Where are we at? So they're in. So now they show up and they get some land in Guyana and they start their commune in the
Oh,
jungle.
yeah, they get there. The other thing that actually drove them there was an assassination attempt on Jones in
Really?
California.
By
Yeah,
who?
it was actually a staged assassination attempt by
Ah.
Jones. Yeah, to get him shot, but they just had, blanks in the gun.
Ah.
So,
A Jesse Smollett affair.
yeah, the Jussie Smollett of cult leaders. Yeah, they moved to Jonestown. And, Jones had a very wide political circle in the United States, too. Um,
In
and
what
that was
sense?
something that he would use to try to keep the larger authorities at bay off of him. He knew like the mayor of San Francisco. He even knew the first lady, Rosalind Carter. They actually
Really?
met. So, but like Stephen Jones said, my father was always grandiose, and and as it got bigger, slightly before they moved to Guyana, Jones started feeling sort of out of touch with a lot of the people in his congregation. So he creates what's called the Planning Commission. And this is essentially the temple leadership who have operational control. And it's going to include people like Vernon Gosney and Tim Carter, who will get even more important as the story progresses.
Mm-hmm.
But,
And by the way, they have guns.
well, yeah. Oh, yeah, once they get into Guyana, they do. But they have the operational control, and they actually handled all the spying on and recording of the members' infractions. So you had essentially a Joseph Stalin sort
K
of thing going on.
KGB.
Yeah, secret police, if you were aware. Children were reporting on parents, and parents reporting on children, and neighbors reporting on other neighbors.
Yeah. I mean, no good communist organization can survive without snitches.
Oh, not at all.
I mean, that's kind of
Most
their bread and
definitely.
butter.
But yeah, they also did a lot of with the punishments. And I thought this was interesting. Jones would force the temple members into boxing matches as punishment,
Really?
with one way stronger opponent just beating on, somebody who was much smaller.
Oh,
Yeah,
so fair fights were not in his, um, you know,
nope,
vocabulary.
not at all. But it was the planning commission that also had a lot of the members sign false statements about themselves. They would claim all sorts of immorality. Like with one woman, she signed a statement that said, "I raped my kid."
What?
And that
Why?
was, well, it was something that he could use to lord over them when they would try to leave.
Well, I mean, why would you sign that, I guess?
They've, why would these people do a lot of the things they
Yeah,
ended up doing? You know?
coercion.
Yeah, coercion and control. And once you get down to it, but yeah, it claimed all sorts of immorality. And one of them said, "I signed a piece of paper saying I wanted to molest my child."
Wow.
Yeah, I can think of one cult off the top of my head that still sort of does that, but I don't want to say their name. If you get my drift on that,
Yeah,
SK.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, yep.
They just might be California based.
Yeah, but let's see. Jones ended up having a child with one of his mistresses that also factors into the fate of the People's Temple as we go on. That
Yeah.
was Grace Stenner, or was it Stoner? I think it's Stenner.
Yeah.
Stener,
Stenner. Yeah.
if I can read my writing correctly. I have the handwriting of a doctor, so. But we were talking a bit about this before we came on here. The Planning Commission, there was an interesting story regarding this and regarding a sort of foreshadowing of the fate of People's Temple, where Jones hands them all uh, tea after a meeting. And
Yeah.
he just says to him, sort of matter of factly, "You've all been poisoned." And then he gave it about 45 minutes, and he said, "Oh, just kidding."
Yeah.
So
Ha 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 ha.
yeah,
Ha ha. Funny joke.
yeah. He
But
called it a test to see how you handle death.
but that wasn't the last time either.
No, no, it wasn't. Not
Um,
at all.
yeah.
But let's see. We already talked a bit about that. 1973 was when they started building Jonestown proper in Guyana.
Oh, so they were there several years.
Yeah. Yep. The village initially only needed to hold about 500 people, which is interesting because it ended up with a lot more.
What, like 1200, something like that?
Yep. It was around 1200. Not to mention the fact that Jones would bring in a huge entourage and he would travel with them too. And one of the defectors, Jeannie Mills, on Jones, said something that I thought was kind of apropos to his mental state. The more power he got, the sicker he got.
Well, yeah, it does that.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I mean, especially if power is your objective. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there are some people who, and it might be rare, but it does happen. But there are some people who accumulate power almost, inadvertently.
Yeah.
And it's not their goal, and they have a moral foundation outside of power seeking, and it doesn't have that effect on them.
Mm-hmm.
But most people who end up with power, they go after it.
Yeah, they really do. Jones is definitely one of them who, I don't know, he just attracted to it sort of from day one, I think. But
Yeah.
they were getting defectors even back in California. And one said that her kids actually told her, quote, go as far away as possible so we aren't the ones assigned to kill you.
Wow.
Yeah. Yep.
Not so they won't find you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So we aren't the ones who have to kill you.
right.
Um, but yeah, they sent a contingent of people down there to start building Jonestown, 1973, and Jones is still on the North American continent, and he's usually very good at handling bad press.
Yeah.
But there has been a reporter sort of on his ass for a while from the SF Chronicle named Marshall Kilduff. He was writing a piece on Jonestown called Inside Jonestown for New West magazine. And Jones was having a hell of a time keeping this guy away from him. So he ends up fleeing to Guyana. And, also, again, because his political base in San Francisco really can't help him either. So,
Right. Yeah. I mean, he knows people, but he doesn't have pull.
no, no, he doesn't have the sufficient pull there for that. So, once Jonestown started hitting about 1,000 people, the food shortages started happening, which Another interesting thing about that tells you what a real shitheel this guy was. He had money throughout all of this to take care of their needs in Jonestown for literally decades.
Wow. But
But he,
he kept it to himself.
yeah, yeah, he hoarded that, and nobody knew. So the food shortages, medical shortages started happening, and it was also around this time when the loudspeakers in the very isolated
Ah,
Jonestown start going off all over,
yeah.
with
Especially
Jones on them 24/7.
especially the middle of the night shit that he would pull.
Yep.
Sleep deprivation, and malnourishment are two key um, bricks in the cult wall.
Oh, absolutely. Makes people that much easier to control
Yeah,
once you get down to it.
absolutely.
So, um, moving ahead a bit to May 1977 is when we have around 900 in Jonestown. Let's see, and Jones throughout all of this is really driving home the utopia angle that hey, we're building our own communist utopia.
But it wasn't, was it?
Nope,
I'm just guessing here.
not at all.
Just spitballing. Utopias never are.
Nope, never ever. And again, around this time, you had Stephen Jones's quote was, his drug use was off the charts. So that's all getting worse too.
Yeah.
Um, and most of the time um, when he's not rambling on the loudspeakers for several hours at a time, or when he's not berating a follower or doling out some sort of punishment around Jonestown, he's literally bloated and passed out in his cabin. Jim Jones.
Probably the people's favorite time of the day.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and it was around this time where he started a new punishment that he was doling out called the box. And it's
Oh,
literally a hole in the ground where people were put into it blindfolded and made to sit in it for quite some time. And Jones would tell whoever's in there that there's eels, snakes, leeches, and all matter of,
mm,
stuff in there with them. Kind of interesting how he uses that psychological angle.
yeah. Big on the psychological torture.
That was another thing I didn't know until I started doing the research on this. But yeah, and the mail was also, of course, censored, both ingoing and outgoing. And throughout that, the contents of letters home to family members were often literally dictated verbatim. Ghazni, his quote was, at this time, it was like a concentration camp.
Yeah, one of the comments from him on the documentary was that during these midnight sermons that he would call them out to, he said
Mm-hmm,
there were always men with guns around the perimeter of the pavilion. He said, but the guns weren't facing outward to protect them. They were facing
mm-hmm.
inward to keep people there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And he had a roommate that had attempted to escape and was tortured so bad that he was afraid to do anything. I mean, he was afraid when the congressional delegation showed up, he was afraid to ask to go home.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I wouldn't doubt it at all. And that another thing that was really keeping people there that I don't think we touched on, beside it being just the huge amounts of jungle around them,
Yeah.
they didn't have a passport. They
Oh,
surrendered those.
right. They had an office in the Capitol.
Mm-hmm.
They had an office in the Capitol, so they probably kept the passports there, so they weren't even on site.
Yep.
So you
They
should
also didn't have money.
right, because you don't need it there, right?
Yeah. I mean, the best thing that they could even hope for, if they managed to, by some miracle, get out of that, would be to get to the American Embassy in Georgetown, which
Yeah,
is 160 miles of basically almost impassable ground
right.
away. So
Yeah,
he,
and it's not like these people had any clue even what direction to go, even if they did
yeah,
get out.
yeah, even if they wanted to,
So let's
definitely,
say you snuck away into the jungle. Which direction? Which direction is Georgetown from Jonestown? How would you
yeah.
even know that?
Oh yeah, they don't have any sort of supplies, let alone compass.
Or maps?
Yeah,
And even if you had a map, how do you know where the hell you are? Unless you have a sextant, for God's sakes.
yep, yep. It's not like they had GPS.
Nope.
So we're still talking what, at least 20 years before it's even
Invented.
invented.
Yep. Which is an
But
interesting story in its own, but not for this
yeah,
podcast.
yeah, I'll have to look that up now. But meanwhile, in San Francisco, the families of the cultists are really scared. So what do? They band together and they call Congressman Leo J. Ryan,
Yeah.
which I think we had a picture of him.
Oh, let me see. Let me see. Do we?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, he's in here. He's in this mix. He'll come up.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just point it out when he gets there then.
By all
But
accounts, a really, you know, authentically decent man.
yeah, he really was. And he was known as a sort of dogged investigator with things like this. Had one heck of a reputation. And I was just
There
looking
he
for
is.
that. Yeah, there is Leo Ryan. Actually, at Jonestown. That's where that picture was taken. They formed the Concerned Relatives Coalition, is what they called it, which also included some ex members,
Hmm.
including Grace Stenner.
Yeah, there was a lot of concerns that people were being held without, against their will,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of the main um, driving force behind the investigation and eventually the trip that they took.
Yeah, that was a big part of it, but then there was also the factor of Stenner's child, who was still at Jonestown,
Oh,
because Jim Jones had the custody over that kid. So it was his kid. So she is one of this concerned relatives coalition, and she actually sued Jim Jones for custody.
oh,
And
interesting.
a Guyanese court issued a warrant for Jones.
Oh, so she sued down there for him
Mm-hmm.
because that would be the jurisdiction there, right?
Yes,
And she
it
won.
would.
That's fascinating.
Or else it was Leo Ryan who put pressure on them. But either way, it was significant to the point that the Guyanese government was actually trying, or he thought, Jim Jones thought, the Guyanese government was going to come and enforce that warrant.
Hmm.
So basically, for about 6 days during that time, Jones kept the entire population of Jonestown at the ready, saying, we're going to get guns or any weapon you can find, pickaxes, hoes, because they're coming to get me. And they did that every day for 6 days.
Wow.
And of course, at the end of the day, nobody came. So
But
after that amount of time, I guess that was enough for him to stop.
yeah, but you'd think that that kind of failed prophecy would turn people against him. But for the deeply committed people, it
Hmm.
actually what actually happens is that they become more committed after a failed prophecy.
Yeah. That happens almost with any sort of cult.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, it's why you see so many doomsday cults. What
Yep.
happens when the doomsday doesn't come? They believe more in some cases
Exactly right.
in the
You'll
prophet.
have a few people that will go, Jesus, what the heck was I doing?
Mm-hmm.
But the core people will double down, and they
Yep.
typically will say, "Oh, we weren't worthy. We
Mm-hmm.
weren't prepared enough. We didn't do enough."
They will.
Yeah,
I mean, they
and
will say that.
and I'm sure Jones had his variation on that when nobody came to, take him away and take the child away. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, they didn't come this time, but they'll come next time, and it'll be worse next time.
And meanwhile, he actually had somebody who was talking to these people in the government because they were convinced to drop the charges against Jones,
Oh,
which ended the siege. Sorry, my notes are a little schizophrenic. So, um,
well, by talk to, you meant, you know, talk to with a suitcase full of money.
probably. And considering it's South America, probably, if I had to guess. Let's see. Oh, there was a couple of the Ryan stories I was looking for. One of them, he got himself anonymously jailed to expose prison corruption.
Wow.
Yeah, that's dedication, man.
That's serious shit, man. Because you gotta be pretty damn confident that when you're done, you can get out.
Yep. Yeah, you would
I'm
have
not
to
sure I
be.
would have that much trust in anybody.
Yep. But yeah, and he was the right guy to talk to, definitely, because he says to the Concerned Relatives Coalition, I'll help you. And he starts on this process of interviewing some who have successfully defected,
Hmm.
and he decides that what's needed is to set up a coalition to go down to
Okay.
Jonestown. So that is what they do. And that is along with his aide, who is now a congresswoman herself, Rep. Jackie Spire. Spire or Spear? Speier.
Oof. That's a tough call. Spire, I would say.
But she actually says that she had a premonition about the trip.
Really?
Yeah. And she still, warned nobody, but says that she had it. Fast forward ahead to November 14th, 1978.
Dun dun dun.
The delegation leaves the United States for Georgetown. Um, they stop there and then they try to make their way to Jonestown. And when Ryan asked, can we enter? Jones basically tells him to fuck off.
They went to the Georgetown offices,
Mm-hmm.
and Ryan actually met Steven there, who was in town for the basketball game.
Mm-hmm.
So Jones's oldest two sons were in Georgetown for the basketball tournament when
Mm-hmm.
Ryan shows up, and which was, um, part of uh, Jones's reluctance to let the boys go because he didn't want them talking to Ryan or any of the family members.
Yeah, which yeah, we'll be getting into more about that too, because from November 14th, we're talking to just 4 days
Yeah,
until everything ends. Um,
yeah, it
but
does.
yes, so they get there. Jones says no. Um, oh, it was Tim Carter, who was another Temple higher up, who ultimately swayed Jones to let them in.
Was that the lawyer?
I can't remember if he was the lawyer or if that was Gosney who was the lawyer. It was
No,
one of
I
the
think it's
two, I would
Gosney. I think it was
imagine.
Gosney. The lawyer played a big hand in getting them in there because he wanted to get he was kind of fed up with Jones, from my impression. That he was kind of fed up with Jones, and he wanted to get the delegation in there, and see that everything's okay, and get him out, quickly and safely.
Hmm. I think that might have been Gosney. Although Carter had a whole family there too. So he would have, more of a reason potentially. But, Carter relayed that story about it where he was talking to him over the phone with it. And this was after Jones went through what he called 20 minutes of non sequitur sentences. Again, to stress sort of the drug condition there. Carter, again, he goes on to say, I was terrified the leader had lost his mind.
Yeah, he he kind of had.
Yeah?
Um, Steven says that at that point, in his estimation, that his dad was like just a few months from death from the drugs.
Oh, wow. I didn't hear that part.
Yeah,
Um,
that's how bad a shape he was in.
you, I wonder if we shouldn't play a bit of the tape now, maybe to give people a better idea.
All right, we'll give this a try.
This is from the what is known as the Jonestown death tape, which is the day that they all decide that they're going to commit revolutionary suicide.
Yeah, okay, so I'm not 100% sure that we're gonna hear this, but let's
Okay.
let's let's give it a try.
Yeah, give it a shot. This will give you an idea.
If you guys can hear this, let us know. Oh yeah, it's coming through.
I wish I could hear it.
Yeah,
Just tell me what section.
it's the first section that's playing now.
Okay.
Okay, so that first section's done.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't. They're saying they can't hear it. RC and Kelly.
Ugh, dang it.
Crap. Well, sorry, guys. I was hoping
Sorry.
that could have given you a bit of a taste of what it
Yeah.
was like within the compound by now. Um, it was actually Jones and a follower sort of sparring, if you will, verbally with it all. And she's saying that she has a right to her control over her destiny. But yeah, the delegation arrives by two small planes landing on the tiny jungle airstrip, Port Kaituma, that was called. Um, so yeah, and once they all get off, I guess sort of predictably, the Concerned Relatives Coalition is fighting over who's going to get the limited number of seats for sending anybody who wants to defect home.
Right.
Yep.
But what's really interesting is that he is so invested in this commune that he cannot bear the thought of a single person leaving.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Um,
so they rehearsed all responses to all kinds of questions. And, I mean, and he rehearsed individually with people what how they would respond to questions
wow.
to
And
make
just a
sh-
level of control.
to make sure that how they would answer these questions was acceptable to him. And it was it was vital to him that not a single person volunteered to leave or was able to communicate with the delegation to ask to leave.
I was just telling them, PBR Street Gang and RC, yeah, we were trying to play a section of the FBI death tape.
Yeah, but
Actually had 4 sections of it we were going to play. But such is technology.
yeah, I thought I had that set up to work, but only could see it, couldn't hear it.
Unfortunately. Um, let's see. Oh, and it was Friday, November 17th was when they actually left Georgetown for Jonestown.
Right. They chartered a small plane, a twin engine turboprop,
Mm-hmm.
and flew the 150 odd miles to the airstrip.
Yep, they did. And of course, when this happens, Jones falls back on message saying the government's coming. And this time he adds in, oh, it's a CIA conspiracy to kill us.
Right. It's always somebody else.
Yep. And just like the woman in the clip we were trying to play there, many thought this was their safe way out. And
Yes.
yeah.
Well, so as is typical in a snitch society, nobody knows. One of the benefits to that, when you're the people in charge, is that people don't know who to trust. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you might think you're confiding to someone that you can trust, and then it turns out that they just go ahead and snitch on you to earn points themselves. And so, um, it's really difficult for people who want to leave to talk to somebody else about it.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. And definitely it creates that sort of atmosphere. Again, even, looking at Stalin's Russia was another great example of it, just written much larger. Um, when they first arrived there, the delegation is touring the People's Temple. I think we have actually a photo of it there where it says that, with the sign that says People's Temple Agricultural Project
Oh
at the
yeah,
front
yeah,
door.
yeah, yeah. We do have that one.
So they're touring that, and predictably, the people that they're talking to are all saying, glad to be here. Um, and towards the end of that night, the people in the temple were putting on a sort of musical variety show for the delegation, where they're all sitting out in this pavilion watching it. And it was around this time when Gosney, Vernon Gosney, decides, I'm going to write a note and see if I can pass it to the congressman
Right.
without anybody seeing it. So he does that, and he tries to covertly pass it to Ryan, but
But
he's not too successful.
he drops it.
Yeah, he put it in
It's
the crook of his arm, and he dropped it.
not exactly, Jean Leclerc.
Yep.
This is not James Bond, you know, um, fieldcraft here going on.
Oh, not at all. In fact, Gosney said I was shaking all over when I did that. So it's dropped, and then somebody walked up, picked it up, and said you dropped something. But around this time as well, there was a 10-year-old
Yeah,
boy
who
who was
watch?
standing around there and says, when he sees it, he's passing a note.
Right.
Just like in a fourth grade class. So,
PBR Street Gang points out that one of the things that Jones told people was that the Russians would come to their rescue.
that's correct. That's actually another part of the tape,
Yes.
which you're
Uh,
going to get to. I guess
w-
because of how they had it organized as a commune, that was one big thing.
right.
That Jones was maybe going to play up the angle that, hey, we're being oppressed by the vile capitalist American government and give them some ammo to use in their Cold War. Give the Russians some ammo,
Yep.
if I had to guess. But yeah, definitely. But so they start putting on that musical that night, and everybody's gathered around in the pavilion, I think they called it.
Right.
And he passes that, and I was just looking to see where I wrote that next part down. Because also during that, the congressman gets a knife to his throat.
What?
Yep.
I didn't see that part.
I was just looking to where I wrote that part down. Like I said, a little disorganized here. Um, Gosney decides to covertly pass the note. Don Harris, the press guy who came with the delegation, meanwhile, is encircling the crowd in the pavilion, and he's noticing, like you were saying earlier, the guys with guns pointed in to keep people in the pavilion. Um,
Yeah. It's
yep.
a it's a communist regimes they, they never worry about people sneaking in.
Nope. It's always about people leaving. So Spire actually said around the time of the note that my heart sank. This is it. It's really true that people were being held there against their will. So news
Yep.
of the note spreads throughout, and some others decide that they want to make a break for it too around that time. And after this whole performance thing is going on, Ryan is talking to Gosney some, and he says to him, "You're the first to ask to leave. You will have first seats on the plane leaving." And Gosney tells Ryan after that, "You are in extreme danger. You need to leave now."
Yeah, he tried to get them to leave that night and not wait for the next morning.
Yep.
And he
Oh,
and he was quite upset that the congressman didn't appreciate the level of danger they were in. And
yeah.
but I mean, you're a U.S. congressman. You don't expect shit to go down.
Yeah. And in fact, I was getting it confused with the next day with the knife to his throat.
Ah,
So it was after that. Um, Harris holds on to the note after Ryan reads it, And he's actually interviewing Jim Jones the next day, and he blindsides him with it, saying, what do you have to say about this note that's saying we're basically prisoners here? Um,
And what did he say?
Jones, he pretty well just dodged it, didn't answer him at all. So, meanwhile, as Congressman Ryan is still talking to more people the next day, November 18th, 1978, Don Sly, a man from the temple, approaches behind Ryan, shaking all over and crying as he holds a knife to Ryan's throat. He says, "Ready to die, motherfucker."
Wow.
And to their credit, various men of Jonestown actually tackled and disarmed him before he could do anything.
So they haven't yet. They haven't gone past the point of no return.
Not quite yet. Um, and Tim Carter, while all this is going on, says to himself, "Oh my God, the leader's a murderer. And I've been playing peace and love, and he's a fucking murderer." He said, "I felt completely naive." And meanwhile, Jones, after all this happens, looks at one of the camera people, and he says to them on video, "I've never felt Jonestown so peaceful."
Wow.
Yeah. And that made a lot of people worry, even the ones who weren't worrying so much up to that point.
It's hard to imagine today that a U.S. congressman would go into the jungles of South America without a single member of a security um, element.
Yeah,
He just
yeah,
he
that
just
really is
grabbed he just
true.
he just grabbed some people that wanted to go with him, and off they went.
Yeah, that's weird. I never had thought about that, but you're right.
No protection at all.
Nobody from the military even with him.
Nope.
It's weird. I wonder why he didn't do that.
Well, because he had balls of stone, for one.
Yeah. Well, that, and he's also worried about seats on the plane. Maybe that's why.
Seats on the plane. He feels that his position and rank protect him as much as anything. Like,
That very well could be a little bit of hubris.
well, I mean, who the fuck is stupid enough to, you know, attack a sitting U.S. congressman, for fuck's sakes? Doesn't matter where you are in the world. Nobody's that dumb.
True.
You
Very true.
you think?
You'd hope, anyway. But yeah, it was during all this that Ryan decides before they take off, he's going to stay behind while the rest of them, or more or less the rest of the group,
Yeah.
heads back to the airstrip. So they take off from there. And where in the hell was I? Never felt Jonestown so peaceful. And it was 10 minutes after this first group leaves. A tractor carrying about 8 armed men leaves Jonestown in pursuit of them.
So they had a flatbed truck, the kind of flatbed with the rails on the side,
Yes,
and that's
being
what,
pulled by a tractor. And that's
I mean,
basically what was necessary.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
So they had one with the delegation, and then they had the armed men uh, take taking up pursuit.
Yeah, essentially. And they would have actually left um, a bit earlier than they ended up leaving if it wasn't for a storm the night before. It goes to show how bad those roads were. That storm caused, that much more mud on there where you basically
Ah,
needed a tractor to get through it.
yep.
So that is where that comes into play. And meanwhile, during all this, Carter is trying to organize his family leaving too, because he was there, his wife Monica was there, and his son Malcolm were all there. His son Malcolm was 4.
Hmm.
Um, and he goes on to say through all this that I felt like there was a target on my back because I helped save the congressman's life, and we're all going to die. And
Jesus.
as they're leaving, Jones says to another one of his followers, "You're not going to leave here walking." Yeah,
And he meant today.
yeah,
Nobody, I mean, you could say that, you know, uh, you could kind of think that was just kind of a general concept, but he really meant today.
yeah. I mean, he really
He
did
knew. He knew already. Because he
what
knew
they were
what,
going to be forced to do.
well, he knew what he sent those men to do.
Hmm. Absolutely. So they were, going after him. They finally catch up with him after a little bit, but
They caught him at the
Ryan,
airstrip, right?
yeah, yeah. And before that, though, Ryan had actually called for another plane to come and, bring
Oh,
anybody from the delegation who wanted to go can go on that one. And
okay.
he, meanwhile, is giving an interview to Don Harris on that airstrip. And it was for that reason that we actually have that video of the men with the rifles showing up and shooting.
Yeah, which we're not going to show.
Yeah. Um, Inspire is, getting people loaded. Uh, and meanwhile, Ryan says to her, "I don't trust that Larry Layton, who was another one who had jumped in with them." So Spire has him on one, and Spire has one of the press people that is with them frisk Layton, and they don't find the gun. So he actually had a pistol with him, in addition to the men approaching with, I think it was AK-47s mostly in
Probably.
the video. Yeah. By now, the tractor approaches the airstrip. The 8 men get out and begin firing. Um, Layton and Gosney were the only 2 in one plane. And Layton ends up actually shooting Gosney twice, once in the side, once in the leg. Um, he goes and he shoots Monica, Carter's wife, twice in the back. And Spire also actually takes a bullet
Hmm.
from one of the 8 riflemen. She survived, of course. Leo Ryan did not
No.
from that. He was shot in the head. So Layton uses his last bullet on Dale Park when his revolver actually jams. And
What?
Gosney, yeah, his revolver jammed. And Gosney, remember, with 2 bullets in him,
Yeah.
tackles the guy and gets the gun away from him.
Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty damn impressive when you have those 2 wounds
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
still have men, with automatic weapons shooting at you at the same time.
Adrenaline's an amazing drug.
This is true. Very true. And Spire, meanwhile, is playing dead under one of the planes.
Ah, that's not a bad move a lot of times.
No, I would imagine not in some situation like this, especially.
Yeah.
And one of the gunmen verifies that Ryan is dead, and they actually end up leaving and going back to Jonestown.
So how many people were killed at the airstrip?
That would have been a total of, man, I don't, I actually didn't write down a number for that.
Oh,
I only have the number for
bad,
back at
Wes.
Jonestown.
Bad.
Yeah, I should have looked at it, looked for that. But yeah, I don't think they factor him into the 910 who died from the
No.
cyanide. But let's see. And eventually,
Yeah.
Guyanese locals actually get to the airstrip where they accidentally put the wounded spires on an anthill away from everything, that's going on, but on an anthill.
Looks like 5 killed, 9 injured.
Oh, okay, at the airstrip alone,
Yeah.
then.
Yeah.
Yep. Oh, yeah, I did write it down. 5 dead on the tarmac.
Yeah.
These include Ryan, 3 members of the media, and a female Jonestown defector.
The pilots were not injured and they took off.
That's good. I
I
didn't write
would.
that down either. Well, definitely. That's the flip side of the adrenaline there.
Right.
Yep. And meanwhile,
Yeah,
Jones.
the cameraman was uh, Bob Bob Brown, and he was killed, but he caught most of that. He captured whatever footage we have. He got that and died in the process.
Hmm. Yeah, that's the one that was partly from the interview they were conducting.
Yeah.
He really was a hero. Um, and meanwhile, back at Jonestown, Jones is gathering everybody else in the pavilion again. He realizes it's no longer an if, but a when
Hmm.
his time is basically up. And the only option he has is, quote, revolutionary suicide, which is different from regular mass suicides that cults go through, by the way.
Say that
Uh,
again.
Revolutionary suicide, it's
Oh,
different from
yeah.
the regular mass suicides that a cult would go through,
Right.
where
Right.
they, thought we are dying for our beliefs, and that's what the message is that we're trying to send. Not that we're going to be hopping the ride on a Hale Bopp comet.
Right. I think one of the earliest recordings of a that kind of a suicide would be the Jewish zealots,
Hmm.
where
Yeah, I think so.
they were surrounded by the Romans, and rather than be have the soldiers all defeated and the women raped and the children murdered, they just all committed suicide.
Hmm. Yep. Heaven's Gate be the Hale Bopp people,
Yeah.
as RC points out.
Yes.
Yeah, he gets back and he starts priming them on what they have to do next. That was actually the death tape that we were trying to play.
Right.
Is that conversation? Um, and he's again marshaling the force of his paranoia, saying they are coming back to attack, and it must not be. Or this must be our final stand.
Well, and to be honest, this time he was probably right.
Yeah, yeah.
They
For once, he was
they
right.
murdered a congressman, which made that pretty inevitable.
Oh yeah,
He
definitely. They'll bring
yeah,
the full force of law down on your head if you're still around.
right.
But Jones's lieutenant, Maria Katsaris, walks up and is whispering to Jones during this, and you just see him ask, "Is it quick? And then does it taste okay?"
Uh,
Yeah.
so they had already been um, mixing the Kool-Aid.
Yes. Yes, they had been there. Elsewhere in Jonestown, human subjects were actually testing the cyanide,
Jesus.
mixed mixed with, as we pointed out earlier,
Flavor Aid.
Flavor Aid.
Right.
Yep, not Kool Aid.
Although widely reported as Kool-Aid.
Yeah, it would be like the difference between Dr Pepper and Flavor Right drink, basically. It kind of sucks though if you're the Kool Aid brand and you have that shitty press that came of it.
Yeah. I don't think it hurt him much, but it probably wasn't fun for them.
Yeah. Yep. But yeah, the death tape recorded all that.
So
Um,
so the interesting thing is that, well, I was going to talk about the practicing. Is this a good spot for that?
yeah, we could definitely do that if you want to get into the practicing.
So Jones, you mentioned it earlier about how he had told people their tea was poisoned.
Mm-hmm.
But he spent a lot of time practicing this exact scenario where people would be uh, committing suicide by Kool-Aid. Um, and and he told them, initially they knew it was practice, but a lot of times he told them it was the real deal,
Oh wow,
just
I
like the
hadn't
tea.
heard that.
Yeah, they thought they were gonna die.
Wow, man, you would think that trick would only work once. That people would, get wise to it after that.
Well, well, he would pass it off as, you've passed your test. And
Mm-hmm.
so they would feel, more part of the group and more accepted.
True, which would
Yeah,
give them an incentive to not, be credulous about it.
right.
Interesting.
And one of the reasons why that's important is because, speaking of pilots, we had just mentioned earlier, one of the axioms among pilots is that under stress, you revert to your most recent training.
Mm-hmm.
And so to make that suicide drink, um, make it possible for people to go through with it, they had to practice it, because so that when they are under stress in that moment, they will revert to that training and
Mm-hmm.
and drink it.
And that's very true, but nevertheless, when they actually did do it this time, there were many people who did not drink it
Yeah,
willingly.
true.
And the other big thing that they would do was literally just take a hypodermic needle, hold them down, and inject them with cyanide. And then, with many of the kids there, they would take it and inject it into their mouth.
Yeah, what, 270 some
Yes.
children that they murdered,
Yes.
oftentimes by their own parents,
Yep.
which by the way was also part of the practice, was to give your kids the Kool-Aid to drink as
Wow.
part of the practice. Um,
Man. Dang.
and some people, as you say, some people would not drink it. And as you hear on the recording, some people argue with him about this move.
Yeah. That was the majority of the first section, the one that we tried to play, was a woman who was arguing with Jones over that, saying she didn't want to do it and basically that she had a right over her own destiny.
I wonder if she
So,
survived.
you know, and getting back to in Georgetown right now,
Yeah,
where
what's going
Jim
on there?
Jones Jr. and Stephen Jones were both there. That lieutenant of Jones's, who I mentioned, Katsaris, Maria Katsaris, gets both the boys into a room where they have a two-way radio where they are communicating between there and between the Jonestown compound. And Jones says to Junior over the radio, Jimmy, we're visiting Mr. Fraser. We're visiting Mr. Fraser. The Avenging Angels have visited Leo Ryan, and we need you to avenge our actions. Now,
Hmm.
essentially, what this was a code for, we are committing revolutionary suicide. Rep Ryan has been killed. We need you to avenge us by killing as many as possible in Georgetown and then killing yourself. So luckily, Junior was smarter than that and he did nothing. Although him and his brother Stephen both begged the Guyanese government to send them back in there. They thought they could stop it,
Wow.
which,
No.
they weren't sent back in, but
And they couldn't have stopped it.
yeah, I would highly doubt it too, whether they could have.
One of the one of the early quotes on that death tape is Jones says, he says, quote, "One of those people on that plane is going to shoot the pilot. I know that. I didn't plan it, but I know it's going to happen. They're going to shoot that pilot, and down comes the plane into the jungle, and we had better not have any of our children left when it's over because they'll parachute in here on us."
Wow. Man, that had to be Larry Layton then, who was going to shoot the pilot.
Must have been.
Yeah, because he was the only one with a concealable gun. So, but man. But yeah, Jones Jr., he said to his dad over the radio in response to that, the people will not die. Basically a stop, don't do what you're going to do.
Yeah, and it didn't help. Well,
Mm-mm.
Jones was too far gone. I mean,
Oh, absolutely.
physically, mentally, emotionally, he was he was whether he, yeah, he was just too far gone to back down. He had no way out.
Definitely. To
And
answer,
yeah, and one of the other points that he says in that tape is, we killed a congressman, the Russians won't help us.
yeah. Yeah, because they were still sort of laboring under that idea.
Yeah.
But to answer PBR's question, um, I'm not sure how many of them were forced
Yeah, there's no way to know for sure.
out of the 910. So I don't even know if they were able to do, autopsies on that many of them.
Yeah.
Did you happen to come across the answer to that? What did they do after they discovered the 910 dead?
They
Did
sent them
they?
back to San Francisco in caskets.
Oh wow,
And a lot of the cemeteries would not take the bodies because they were afraid of cyanide leaching into the groundwater.
no shit,
And
really?
they were, about half of them were buried in a communal grave.
Dang, wow. So I didn't read that part.
Um, some people, while this was going on, the suicide and the murder, because some people actually were shot trying to escape,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And but some actually did. They snuck into the past the tree line into the jungle and waited,
Mm-hmm.
and that was pretty good number actually. What? How
I
many
thought it
people?
was about a couple hundred.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. If I'm not mistaken. And while all this is going on, Carter was actually taken to a back cabin on the People's Temple property where they had 3 suitcases filled with money, which Jones tasked him to deliver to the Russian embassy in Georgetown.
What?
Yeah. I don't know if he thought that he could buy his freedom with that or if going by the whole old school communism thing, he thought that, oh, I have to do whatever I can to help Russia, Mother Russia, or what have you. But yeah, 3 big suitcases full of cash. And
Well,
Carter was
he
another one of those
yeah,
who escaped into the
he says it
jungle.
was three.
Well,
Maybe it was four initially.
Could be. Yeah, he was another one of those couple hundred who escaped. Harder in family.
But only because he was supposed to, you know, execute a mission for him.
Yeah. Well, I honestly don't think he would have been one of them to take it willingly.
Well, no, no.
But yep.
Um, there's mention in Wikipedia that a handful of people left when the uh, the second tractor went after the congressman and actually they went in a different direction and made it to a nearby town.
Oh wow. Yeah. And let's hope so. I think I remember writing that down too. That's where most of them fled to. I was just looking to see if I could find the name of it.
I had it here. Matthews Ridge.
That's it. Yep. They fled there.
11 people.
And more than 300 of the 910 were never identified.
Wow.
And most of these 300 were children. So it's likely more than
They
270 that died were children.
and possibly unidentified because they were born there
Yeah, exactly.
and there were no records or not enough
None at
records.
all.
It's not like they were Germans or anything.
Yep. I was just looking to see if there's anything else on that. Revolutionary suicide. Oh, to get the actual goal for that. To protest the conditions of an inhumane world was Jones's quote.
Ah, yeah,
Yep.
inhumane. Inhumane.
Hmm.
People, letting people leave. It's inhumane.
Oh, I guess so. And by the evening of November 18th, word of the mass suicides had reached the Georgetown government.
Quite possibly from the pilots.
Yeah, most likely. They in turn send the army into Jonestown.
And they see something that has never been seen before or since.
Oh, yeah, to the point that they even had trouble describing it over radio. So they actually had to, bring in the cameras to
Yeah,
show that.
yeah. Uh, just bodies on bodies on bodies that they. So initial reports said 300 dead. Then it was 400. Then it was 500. Then it was 600. It took days before the final tally because people were piled up on top of each other.
Yep. Oh, and during all this, Jim Jones dies by gunshot to the head.
He wouldn't even
Suicide.
take his own fucking poison. Of course he wouldn't.
Nope.
And is it was it suicide or was it not suicide? Was somebody pissed at him?
Suicide is the official report.
Mm,
I would imagine pretty early on he probably walked back into his cabin and did it.
yeah.
So that is all I have on Jonestown.
Yeah, I
This
want to put this quote from Stephen up one more time because it just so telling. He was a sick fucker and
Oh,
he
absolutely.
caused the death of almost 1,000 people.
He did.
And it was this shook the world. I and I know that because at the time I was actually in Sweden,
Oh, wow.
And I remember going to the library and poring over the Newsweek and Time magazines, reading every word about this and seeing the photos and just being aghast and appalled and just, you know, shaken to my core that this kind of shit could happen. Um,
Yeah.
um, and in this, I watched this other documentary series that was produced by the French and 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 subtitled, and they one of the reporters was like, we all thought that religion wasn't interesting to people anymore, and here's this whole cult where all these people died because of it.
Yep. I think we'll continue to see it as well, never eradicate it.
No, not completely, but yeah, it's tough. It's not an easy thing to convince people to commit mass suicide.
Oh, not at all.
That's a tough sell. That's a really tough sell. I mean, even Manson didn't pull that off.
No, I mean, he didn't. And, look at how hard it was, even with Jones, where he had him, up to a huge other point there.
Yeah.
He had him wrapped around his finger for so much other stuff.
And still, over a third of the people wouldn't go along with it, at least.
Oh, yeah. Well, and to answer Kelly's question, no, they weren't hoping for anything spiritual with this
No.
suicide. This is where that revolutionary suicide idea comes in. They were
Th-
doing it for a political aim. They were not doing it for a spiritual aim.
yeah, I mean, there is, in the death tape, Jones talks about, it's just preferable that we die this way rather than at the hands of our enemies.
Yeah, the exact quote was something like, I would rather spend I would rather die this day than spend 10 more days in your godforsaken world, or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is another thing that does definitely make this different from other cults.
Even though it was a religion initially, it really turned into a political. Uh, um, I lost my word. It turned into a
Yeah.
political thing.
Yeah, I think after he embraced socialism is when you started to see that. And a lot of people like to conveniently gloss over Jonestown when they're talking about areas and times in history when socialism, Marxism hasn't worked. They conveniently forget Jonestown as another failed experiment in that.
Interestingly, it's right next to Venezuela,
Yeah, this is true. I hadn't thought of that.
which is busily turning into the Stone Age under
Y-
communism.
yep. Such an oil rich country, too.
Yep.
Yeah, that's just kind of a personal pet peeve of mine when they gloss over Jonestown in that list.
Right. Because they had every opportunity to to quote unquote do it right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, most definitely.
Nobody was bugging them. They had no outside influences. It was just them and their choices.
Hmm. Oh, yeah.
All right. Well,
I think we beat him back into hell where he belongs.
oh man. Stay there, Reverend Jones. Stay there.
Yep.
Um, yeah, this was a big one. Jonestown, don't drink the Kool-Aid.
I think of
Flavor
any
Aid.
time I don't drink the flavor aid. Yeah, I think it's probably going to be this way with the others that we look at too.
It's
Including Waco
yeah.
would be one. The other death cults.
Yep.
Waco Shinrikyo was technically a death cult.
Manson, of course. We have a special date set aside for Charlie.
Yep, August 8th. We'll be looking at Manson. Of course, you can look at him both as a death cult and in terms of the isolated murders that they
Right,
did too.
right. He didn't rack up the numbers, but that's only because he got caught early.
Yeah, yeah, he didn't get a whole lot there with the numbers.
But
I think he,
he sure got the devotion though.
oh yeah, he definitely did. I think it's because he was more focused too. So I would argue that the real motive for the Manson murders was just pure, unadulterated greed. But we'll get into that August 8th,
August 8th will be Charlie.
the 50th anniversary of the Tate murders. That day.
Awesome.
So be here,
And we'll
everybody.
cover other death cults as well.
Yep. We're not going to be doing them back to back, but we'll be
No, no.
sprinkling this in.
Right. Every now and then
So,
we'll toss in a death cult for you.
yep.
All right. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Wes, for your exhaustive research as usual.
I wish I could say my pleasure, but you can. The
Uh,
sentiment's there.
yeah, I mean, there's some satisfaction, if not pleasure.
Hmm.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.